How I Uncovered My Stepsister's $4.8 million scam. Emma's earliest memories were filled with laughter and light. She remembered the smell of freshly baked cookies in the oven and the warmth of her father's comforting embrace. But everything changed the day he remarried Linda. She hadn't known what to expect from a new mother figure. But Linda wasn't like the women Emma had imagined when she daydreamed about such things. Linda was beautiful, poised, and always seemed to have everything under control. But that control masked something darker, a possessive nature that quickly revealed itself to Emma. At first, Emma tried. She really did. She tried to make the best of the situation, even when her father's new wife would ask pointed, judgmental questions that made her feel like she wasn't quite enough. But the real challenge began when Sarah, Linda's daughter from a previous marriage, moved in. Sarah was older, more experienced, and effortlessly graceful. She could charm anyone she met, including their parents, and it didn't take long for Emma to sense that Sarah saw her as a competitor, even as she never voiced it outright. Behind Sarah's perfect smile was a quiet animosity, a coldness that Emma couldn't quite shake. It was on the night of Emma's high school graduation that the first rift truly formed. The celebration was supposed to be Emma's moment, but Sarah managed to steal the spotlight. She had spent weeks preparing for a recital, and during the party, she showcased her talents. Everyone gathered around her, impressed by the way Sarah seemed to glide through life effortlessly. Emma smiled through the evening, but deep down, a knot of discomfort began to grow. She had worked so hard for this day, for this one moment where she would feel proud of her accomplishments, but instead she felt small and insignificant in the shadow of her stepsister's charm. As Emma moved into college and pursued a career in finance, she poured herself into her studies, determined to build a future for herself without relying on anyone. She earned scholarships, internships, and eventually landed a job at a prestigious firm. The independence she cultivated was both a comfort and a shield against the lingering emotional tug of her family. Meanwhile, Sarah had taken a different route. She hadn't shown much interest in school or work, but she had learned how to manipulate the people around her. Emma's father, once strong and vibrant, began to show signs of illness. When he was diagnosed with leukemia, everything changed. Emma didn't hesitate to take charge of his care. She moved back home to help him with treatments, managing his medications and overseeing the home care nurses. But Sarah became more distant, increasingly involved in their father's finances and estate. Emma didn't understand why Sarah, who had always seemed indifferent to their father, was suddenly taking such an active interest in his affairs. Emma chalked it up to a mixture of guilt and responsibility. After all, Sarah was his daughter too, and perhaps she was simply trying to make up for lost time. But something in the back of Emma's mind told her that Sarah's motives weren't as pure as they seemed. One fateful evening, just as Emma had settled into the rhythm of caregiving, disaster struck. Her father, weak from treatment, made a decision that would change everything. He called Emma into his study, his voice shaky as he handed her an envelope. "Take this," he said softly. "I want you to keep it safe, for when the time comes." Inside the envelope was a key and a note with a cryptic message. "The truth will be revealed. Don't trust Sarah." Emma didn't fully understand, but she promised to keep the key safe. She tucked it away in her drawer, not thinking much of it at the time. Days later, Emma's world began to crumble. Sarah had somehow managed to access her father's accounts and had begun making large withdrawals. When Emma confronted her father about it, he seemed distracted, unwilling to discuss the matter. It was then that the first whisper of betrayal crept into Emma's heart. Something wasn't right, and she couldn't ignore it. It had been a week since the strange conversation with her father, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her father's health had declined rapidly. The once vibrant man who had taught her how to fish on quiet Sunday afternoons now lay in a hospital bed, frail and distant. His eyes, once full of life, seemed cloudy, and his speech had become slurred. Emma sat by his side every day, keeping watch as Linda and Sarah carried on with their usual pretenses. Linda, ever the picture of grace, seemed to take a hands-off approach to the situation, though Emma couldn't help but feel a cold undertone in her interactions. Sarah, on the other hand, was constantly hovering, making sure that her father's financial affairs were in order. At first, Emma had thought it was just her paranoia talking. After all, Sarah had always been the type to make sure everything looked perfect, but the longer she watched her stepsister, the more she realized Sarah was too involved, too insistent on handling things that didn't concern her. Every time Emma brought up a conversation about her father's health or the care plan, Sarah was there, interjecting with a solution that always seemed to benefit her. One evening, after the nurses had left and her father had fallen into a deep sleep, Emma decided to investigate. She knew there had to be more to this than a simple matter of caring for a sick man. The envelope her father had given her nagged at her mind. She had been too distracted to open it earlier, but now it seemed like the only clue she had left. She returned to her room, pulled open the drawer and retrieved the key and note. With trembling fingers, she examined the key. It was small and old-fashioned, with intricate engravings along the sides. The note was short and cryptic. "The truth will be revealed. Don't trust Sarah." Her heart raced. What was her father trying to tell her? And why hadn't he told her this directly? There was something important in that safety deposit box, she was sure of it. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Emma continued to care for her father, her thoughts constantly returning to the safety deposit box. She hadn't mentioned the key to anyone, but she knew that soon she would need to act. But before she could make a move, Sarah did something that would set everything in motion. It was late one night when Emma noticed her laptop had gone missing. She had been working on an important project for work, and when she went to check it, it was gone. At first, she assumed she had misplaced it. But then she found Sarah sitting in the living room, typing furiously on the same laptop. "Sarah, where did you get that?" Emma asked, her voice calm, but her heart hammering in her chest. Sarah looked up, feigning innocence. "What do you mean? It was in the guest room. I thought you left it there." Emma's mind raced. She didn't believe her stepsister for a second. The laptop had been locked with a password only Emma knew. How could Sarah have gotten into it? But before Emma could say anything else, her father's voice came from the hallway. "Emma, come here. I need to talk to you." She left Sarah in the living room, trying to push the worry aside, but something gnawed at her insides. The next morning, Emma awoke to the sounds of heated arguments in the house. Her father was no longer in the hospital but had returned home, and Sarah was with him in the study. Emma approached cautiously, her instincts telling her that something wasn't right. As she walked into the room, she saw her father sitting at the desk, a stack of papers in front of him. Linda stood by the window, arms crossed, watching silently, but it was Sarah's smirk that sent a chill down Emma's spine. "Emma," her father said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've made a decision. I've changed my will." Emma felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean? Why?" Her father avoided her gaze and Sarah quickly jumped in. "Don't worry, Emma. It's for the best. Dad's just making sure everything is in order." Emma's heart began to pound. She could already feel the tension in the room thickening. Before she could protest, Sarah handed her a sheet of paper, a new will. The contents were shocking. The majority of her father's wealth, including the family home, was now left to Sarah. Emma's name was nowhere to be found. "You're disinheriting me?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. "After everything I've done for you?" Her father looked away, tears in his eyes. "I had no choice, Emma. Sarah has been so helpful. I need to make sure she's taken care of." It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. Sarah was standing there pretending to be the dutiful daughter, but Emma could see the triumphant glint in her eyes. "I don't believe this," Emma whispered, her hands trembling. "You don't have to," Sarah said sweetly, a false sympathy in her tone. "The will is done, it's legal now, and as for your things, well, you'll need to find somewhere else to stay." Emma was thrown out of the family home without warning. It didn't matter how many years she had spent caring for her father, or how deeply she had invested in this family. One afternoon, everything she knew, everything she had worked for, was gone. The house, the inheritance, her place in the family. All of it was taken from her in one swift motion. She felt lost, betrayed, abandoned. But even in her grief, there was a flicker of something else, something that wouldn't let her give up. She knew Sarah had done something to manipulate their father. The laptop, the strange will, the way Sarah had wormed her way into their father's trust. It all pointed to something sinister. But what? A week passed, and Emma tried to piece together the fragments of her life. She rented a small apartment that every time she tried to look forward, the memory of the betrayal came crashing back. There had to be something she could do to prove Sarah's deceit. And then it hit her. Her father had given her a key, a clue hidden in plain sight. Her hands were shaking as she made her way to the bank. It was a small, unassuming building that her father had frequented for years. She had always known there was something important in that safety deposit box, but she hadn't realized how vital it was until now. When she arrived at the bank, the manager greeted her with a polite smile, but Emma could see the uncertainty in his eyes when she mentioned the safety deposit box. "I'm here to access a box," she said, holding out the key. "I believe it's under my father's name." The manager hesitated but then nodded. "Let's see what we can find." As the vault doors creaked open, Emma's heart raced. There in the box was a letter from her father, and within it was the truth. The letter explained everything: how Sarah had been siphoning money from their father's accounts, forging documents, and manipulating him into changing the will. Her father had known about Sarah's betrayal, and he had left this letter as proof of Emma's innocence. But there was more. Along with the letter was a collection of bank statements, phone records, and security footage, all the evidence Emma needed to expose Sarah for the fraud she was. Armed with the truth, Emma made her way to the family home once again. Sarah and Linda were there, likely to celebrate their victory, but Emma was ready to fight back. She arrived at the house just as Sarah was preparing to leave. Emma confronted her stepsister, presenting the evidence. The security footage, the phone records, the forged documents, it was all there, and it was irrefutable. "Sarah," Emma said coldly, "you've been playing everyone, but it's over now." Sarah's face turned pale as she realized what Emma had uncovered. Linda, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You think this will change anything?" she spat. "It already has," Emma replied, her voice steady. "You're both going to prison." The moment Sarah and Linda saw the evidence in Emma's hands, their expressions shifted from arrogant confidence to panic. For a brief moment, Sarah tried to feign ignorance, but the truth was undeniable. Emma had come prepared. She presented the bank statements that clearly showed Sarah's withdrawals and transfers from her father's account, each one marked with Sarah's signature. She played the phone call recordings, capturing conversations between Sarah and Linda where they had conspired to manipulate her father into changing his will. "I knew what you were doing, Sarah," Emma said, her voice shaking but determined. "You thought you could erase me from his life, but you couldn't erase the truth." Sarah stood frozen, her face pale as she realized the full extent of Emma's knowledge. Linda, on the other hand, started to bluster, her sharp words failing to mask the panic rising in her throat. "You don't know what you're talking about," Linda spat, but the tremble in her voice betrayed her. "I think I do," Emma replied, pulling out a final piece of evidence, a set of security footage from the family home, showing Sarah sneaking into her father's study late at night, just days before the will had been altered. The footage clearly revealed Sarah accessing documents on the desk. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Emma said, her voice low but resolute. "But you've crossed a line. You'll pay for this." The police arrived shortly afterward, responding to Emma's earlier call. When Sarah and Linda were arrested, Emma felt a strange sense of relief. The years of pain, confusion, and betrayal were finally being acknowledged. As they were escorted out in handcuffs, Sarah shot Emma a look of pure venom. "You won't win, Emma. You can't take everything from me," Sarah hissed, her eyes blazing with hatred. Emma stood tall, unshaken. "You're already done." The legal battle that followed was long and arduous, but the evidence Emma had gathered left little room for Sarah and Linda to deny their crimes. The trial became a spectacle as the media covered every twist and turn, and the truth of Sarah's manipulation came to light. The courtroom was tense as Emma took the stand. She told her story of her father's illness, of the betrayal, and of the evidence that had been buried under layers of deceit. The defense tried to paint Emma as vengeful, accusing her of concocting a story to get back at Sarah for stealing their father's affection, but the jury was unmoved. The bank records, security footage, and phone recordings all told a much different story. Sarah's defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence. When Emma presented a letter from her father, written shortly before his death, explaining how he had known of Sarah's manipulations, the case was all but sealed. The final blow came when Linda's own involvement in the conspiracy was revealed. She had been an active accomplice in the plot, helping Sarah hide her tracks and covering for her actions. Linda's role in manipulating her father, as well as her attempts to alienate Emma, were laid bare. When the verdict was read, Sarah was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Linda was sentenced to 5 years for being an accomplice. As they were led away in handcuffs, Emma's heart pounded, not with joy, but with a strange sense of closure. The damage had been done. They would pay for their actions, but the wounds they left would take far longer to heal. With Sarah and Linda behind bars, Emma found herself standing on the precipice of a new life. The home she had once been cast out of was now hers to reclaim. It felt surreal, walking through the door of the family house, the place where so many memories had been twisted into pain and loss. But as she stood in the foyer, looking around at the familiar walls, Emma realized that reclaiming the house wasn't just about getting back what was hers. It was about moving forward. Her father's legacy, though tainted by betrayal, still held value. She was determined to honor him, to make something good come from the mess Sarah and Linda had created. Emma used her inheritance to establish a scholarship in her father's name. It was a way to give back, to help others who had been through struggles of their own, and to make sure that her father's memory lived on for something positive. She threw herself into her work, building a foundation that would support young people in need of educational opportunities. But it wasn't just her work that kept Emma going. Over time, she sought therapy to help her heal from the emotional scars left by Sarah's betrayal. It was a long process, but Emma was determined to rediscover who she was without the weight of family expectations, without the shadow of manipulation. Slowly, she rebuilt her life. She surrounded herself with friends who lifted her up, who supported her as she navigated her way through this new chapter. Emma learned how to trust again, how to open her heart to people who cared for her genuinely. It wasn't easy, but it was a journey worth taking. Months passed, and Emma had made a life for herself. The past was no longer a chain around her ankle. She no longer obsessed over the wrongs done to her, but instead she focused on what she could control, her own future. Sarah and Linda attempted to reach out to her while in prison, sending letters through the mail. But Emma didn't respond. There was nothing left to say to them. Their actions had severed any connection they had once shared, and Emma realized that true healing would only come when she let go of the people who had caused her so much pain. One morning, as Emma sat by her window, looking out at the world she had fought so hard to rebuild, she felt a deep sense of peace. Her father's legacy was intact, and her own life was finally her own. She had been through the fire, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resolute in her purpose. Sarah and Linda had tried to steal her inheritance, her family, and her peace of mind, but in the end they had failed, and Emma had found something far greater than money: integrity, love, and the strength to rebuild from the ashes. As Emma looked back on everything she had endured, she understood the lesson her father had tried to teach her. True wealth lies not in material possessions, but in the values we hold dear. In the end, it was her integrity, her love for her father, and her commitment to truth that had led her to victory. She had learned that no one could take away her peace unless she allowed them to. She was free. Emma smiled as she walked out into the world, her heart full of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk, and for the first time in years, she was ready to embrace the future with open arms.